Hello, fine folks, and welcome to Booghy Plays. This evening I am not, this evening here in Romania. Probably a whole other time on the other part of the world. I'm playing with questions. I'm doing an interview. I'm interviewing Joris Wiersinga. I hope I pronounced his name right. Um, the half of Splatterspellen. Splatterspellen being one of the most interesting, odd, different board game publisher in the industry. And being a big fan of their games, I tried for a while to do this interview, and I am quite happy that finally we were able to do it. So I'm going to welcome Mr. Joris, or Joris, is Joris? Did I say it right?
It's Joris, yeah.
Joris,
Joris.
okay.
Joris Wiersinga.
Welcome.
Apologies for the Dutch name, it's unpronounceable.
Welcome. How are you feeling? Everything all right in the Netherlands?
Yeah, it's nice and sunny here, so it's cold, but nice and sunny. So, yeah, for sure. And very happy to do the interview.
Welcome. The interview has two parts. The first part is, but they are both about you. But the first part is the last part is a fast questionnaire which you're going to have to answer and which always takes everybody by surprise. But I think you're gonna be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problems for certain. So let's start with the beginning. Joris, where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in the Netherlands in a town called Arnhem, famous because there was a big fight in the Second World War, and some movies were made about it. I grew up a bit strangely in first the Dominican Republic, and then in Al Yemen, in the Arab country Yemen, and then in Indonesia. My father was an agricultural engineer, and he had a resume that kind of started with duty stations, and then it had the register of an atlas next to it. I think he managed 55 countries where he worked. So I grew up traveling and living in very remote places sometimes. So in Yemen, for instance, we were the only Westerners in the village where we lived. And we had no electricity and no water in the house, and so that's how I grew up.
That sounds interesting. That sounds like an interesting life. You're a child of the 70s or the 80s?
I was born in 1973, so yeah.
Yeah, it's, let's say until the mid 80s, towards late 80s. So how was it to you said your father was an engineer. What was your mother's profession?
My mother originally trained as a nurse, but she then married my father and did not work as a nurse in all those countries, although she did it kind of helped because we were. One of the books that went everywhere with us is a book called Where There Is No Doctor, because there was never a doctor in the places that we lived in. And after we returned to the Netherlands when I was 12 years old, and we lived there. And then my mother became a teacher. She taught French. So she was a French teacher. And then later she became a nurse again. So she is kind of...
Multiple professions.
Yeah.
Well, you grew up in many places. How was it to grow up without water and electricity and then go to water and electricity?
Yeah, the difference, because I grew up first in Yemen and then in Indonesia, and Indonesia was kind of the opposite. So in Yemen, we lived in the middle of nowhere, and then Indonesia, we lived in a city, one of the biggest in Jakarta, one of the biggest cities in the world. and there we had a driver, for instance, and people working in the house. And in Yemen there was absolutely nothing, and in Indonesia there was like 10 times more than anyone would
ever need.
Imagine.
Yeah.
So it's been quite extreme in that sense. I think it does form your personality in the sense that it gives you a very international outlook. So I don't really have I don't really have roots. Yeah. It makes it gives you the ability to quickly make friends, but also to quickly forget about friends, because I have grown up in a way that the person that you would work with or that you would play with every day could always leave the next day, because it depended on the father's, mostly the fathers, sometimes mothers, but mostly fathers' profession. And from people would go on holiday, and then you would get a letter saying, "I'm sorry, I'm not coming back because my father is on a different project. So hope to see you again in 5 years." Which is, if you're 6 years old, that is a very long time.
Long time, yeah. You are a lonely child. You are the only child. Did you have any siblings?
I have 3 younger sisters. Oh. Yeah, so I've never been lonely in that way. No.
And how was it to grow up with 3 sisters, no boys in the house?
Yeah. My oldest sister never wanted to play games, which was unfortunate. She still hates games, so I always give her children. I give them games for their birthday, and then she has to play again. My 2 younger sisters, but they're 6 years younger, they kind of thought it was cool to play games. Yeah, it's of course I'm the oldest, so that makes it a little bit easier than if you have older sisters, I guess. But it means that it's our house was always very dominated by girls talk.
Yeah. What were your interests going from there to there? How did you you went to school? You were homeschooled, or did you go to school there? You had wherever you were going.
Yeah, my mother homeschooled us originally in Yemen, so that was because there was absolutely no school there. And also in some of the travels later, because we didn't travel sometimes, and then my mother would homeschool us. But in Indonesia, there was actually a Dutch language school, because there's a pretty big Dutch community because of the historical ties. We used to have some presence there. We were colonizers of the country, and that still leads to a lot of Dutch people living there. And there's a Dutch school, so I went to a Dutch school, and that, oh, by the way, is even if those were people who would sometimes leave, I still am good friends with a core group of people who live there, that I still see with some quite regularly, which is strange, because these are people that I was close to when I was 10 years old, and then I didn't see them for 20 years, and then we got back together. But because we grew up in the same way, traveling around and having parents that traveled around, there's something apparently that you share that means that even 30 years later, it's still pleasant to spend time in each other's company.
Yeah. So you said you got back when you were 12 years old in the Netherlands, and from then on you lived in the Netherlands. You haven't.
Yes. Well, I have. I lived in the Netherlands and I studied in the Netherlands. Then I've studied in France as well. I have also worked in Finland and in South Africa and in Kuwait.
So you've been around.
I've been around. Yeah.
We'll get there. I don't want to hurry. So, in a way, as you said, your childhood was very well um, where you lived had an imprint, or had a imprint on your childhood. Did you how did you spend your time? Did you play games while you were a child? Did you play games with with the family? Did you manage to play with other kids? Did you played sports? Maybe how did the childhood go by?
So when we lived in Yemen, when I was very young, I would play on the streets with the kids around, speaking Arabic and running around, trying that when we lived when I lived in Indonesia, I would have the friends I lived in a street with only older people. There were no children in the street where I lived. And my friends were friends from school, so you would have to have an appointment with them because they would live. They would live Jakarta is a very busy city and very full. So going from one place to another always takes about 45 minutes to an hour and a half by car. So what you would do is you would go with friends. You would agree to play at their house, and you would go from school to their house, and then play at their house, and then at the end of the day you would be picked up. But you could not do any. It was very hard to do something spontaneous because then you'd have to ask your mother to please drive me for 1 hour to this place,
and 1 hour back.
Yeah. So that was different. And when we lived, and yes, I played games. I also made games. I in fact have. I distinctly remember that I had friends who who agreed to come over and
play your games, play test your games.
No, come over on the express condition that we would not be playtesting games, because that I wanted to do lots of stuff, but not that. So I used to. My father, as an engineer, had these big maps that he would draw, and I would get the old versions of the maps, and on the back side of the old maps, I would draw games. And my father was very fond of drinking a glass of whiskey in the evening, and the whiskey would come in a box, and I would get the box, and there I would put the stuff in, and then we would have a type of cookies, and there was an insert in the cookies, and that I would use as an insert inside the box. I still have a couple of these games.
So, why did you start doing that? Was it you felt lonely? You felt?
I don't know. There were some games that I really liked. We didn't have so many games, but we had some games that were quite funny. You couldn't really buy games, I guess, in Indonesia at the time. At least not. You could buy Ludo or Monopoly, but I think even something like Risk would not be available. I know that one of the friends that I still see from Indonesia made Risk himself, because he played it with at a nephew's house when he was on holiday in the Netherlands, and then he asked his parents to get a copy, and it was not available, so he made his own version of Risk. Yeah. I always like this kind of stuff. I like making stuff in general. I also wrote booklets when I wrote little stories and booklets, and I made my own little newspaper that I tried to sell to people, and I made my I founded a society, which was I read a series of books called The Secret Seven, and I was very inspired by that. And so I made a secret society, and we were going to solve crimes. But as I remember, we never found any crimes to solve. But
So you are a rather creative child.
Yeah, I loved making stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, probably being the oldest one. Yeah, you find a way to express yourself that way. Um, so you came back and you went to high school. You did high school probably in Netherlands and university. What did you during high school? Did you start playing more and more games? When you came back to Netherlands, did you start to play more games?
Yeah, so in high school, I started playing, first of all, also computer games, but also board games. I had a neighbor who came by, and we used to play Talisman really a lot. There was a game shop, and you had to cycle for 1 hour to get to the game shop, and then buy a game and cycle for 1 hour back. And I bought Talisman, and then 1 week later or 2 weeks later, I thought I wanted the expansion, so I cycled there again and bought the expansion. Then, as soon as I had more money, I cycled there again to buy the next expansion. I think I played Talisman for 3 or 4 years every weekend with this friend of mine.
I see.
And at some point, I found a group of people who were already students. I was 16 at the time. I think they were probably 20 or so. And they played Civilization and 18xx. I played a lot of role-playing as well in the first years before meeting these guys. I did lots of role-playing. I had role-playing groups, and these guys also played role-playing. They did 18xx and Civ, and a couple of them were students, a couple of them were PhD students, so they must have been even older.
Smart students.
Yeah, and I really liked this group of people. I did not always enjoy the. I'm super
competitive.
I'm a super nerd, so I'm very interested in all kinds of subjects. Really, I've ridiculously broad interest in lots of stuff, but then also very, very deep. And the people in my school or in my class did not always share this kind of interest, I have to say, or I felt at the time. I think now probably I would be better able to find common interests, but at the time I found it very difficult. And these guys, I enjoyed the games, but also just their company and the discussions. Yeah. And so I played lots of Evelyn Hill, lots of the old Evelyn Hill games. But at some point also at school, we had in high school. I created a diplomacy group, and we would play. I don't know if you know, and we would play every the first break was negotiation. End of the second break, you had to enter your orders, and then I would compute the orders. And the next morning, you would get the overview of where we stand, and then first break was negotiation again.
Yeah.
It's the only way you can get a diplomacy game to actually finish because you can take a year to finish it.
You can do that. I am not getting close to that game.
It's a dangerous game. It can cost you some friendships, but
that's what I'm saying.
It's worth it if you win.
Okay, so you went to university. What were you interested in university, and what did you end up studying?
I studied lots of stuff. I studied. I graduated at high school in too many subjects already. And then because you can choose your subjects and you're supposed to choose 7, but I chose a bit more. And then I went to university and I studied biology and history. That's not what you do. You should do one study, but I did both. And then later on I also studied law. because it started with a stupid wager with someone that I could do a study of law or a year of law in 1 month, but I didn't make it. I lost my wager, and then I was very interested because I passed all the topics except one, and I didn't understand why I didn't pass that topic. So then I started really studying, and then I got super interested in law. So I got a law degree.
But you're not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer.
I have a master's degree in law. I am not. I did not do a bar exam, so I cannot. But
you could do that if you want to.
I could, yeah. It's.
I see.
The work of a lawyer doesn't appeal to me, but the concept of law appeals to me a lot. I think it's the theory of it is very. It's like mathematics with words. It's very fascinating.
In a way, and you ended up working in the computer video games industry, right? In a way, let's call it like this.
Yeah, I first, so I wanted always to be an academic. So my whole life I thought I would be an academic. And then in practice, I thought academic life was a little bit too, it didn't really have a contribution to the world. Or I thought that when I did this as a student, I made stuff and I could not explain to people what I did. It was too... people did not really get it. It was so complicated that you would just see them glaze over if you explained what I was working on. Then they would go, and change the subject. I thought it was interesting, but it's too far removed from what people understand.
You are talking about research.
Yeah. My graduation thesis was on pattern formation in bacterial colonies. So modeling how bacteria communicate and what kind of spatial patterns can occur. And it makes beautiful pictures and beautiful Christmas cards, but it's a very hard subject to share with other people, probably, even with your colleagues. Yeah,
probably, yeah.
And I always wanted to do a PhD on this, but then I kind of didn't. And then I felt lost. I applied to a number of places. I became a business consultant first before I went into this computer game stuff that I do now. I worked for 8 years for a big consultancy firm. That's where I traveled around the world and worked in different places.
What did you consult on?
I had a kind of funny specialization. I always said it had to start with an H. So I did high tech and harbors, which seems to have nothing to do with each other, and it doesn't have anything to do with each other. But I did operations management, which is my specialization was to help people, especially in factories and but also in container ports, which was one of my specializations, to make sure that you work in a more efficient manner using lean manufacturing technology. But for that I traveled around the world and I would do stuff like, for instance, in South Africa, I would do workshops with stevedores, the guys who are working on the ground in the port, who sometimes could not read or write, and they would come up with ideas on how to improve the port, and then in the evening I might be presenting that to the Minister of Transportation and talk with the minister about these ideas that came from guys who couldn't read or write in the morning.
But they made sense. They couldn't.
They made sense.
They couldn't read or write, but they were there.
Course.
They were working there.
Of course, they were spending all their day,
exactly.
And that's true that's the basic philosophy of this type of improvement. The guys who are doing the work every day, they know how to improve stuff. But they don't get hurt. the big boss, being a big boss is very dangerous because as soon as you open your mouth, everyone listens and they shut up. But you don't know. The big boss doesn't know because he's not there. He's looking at other stuff. He doesn't spend days on end taking twist locks of containers.
So you ended up in the end, and this is what you do now, and I find that interesting and different again. And you help people with disabilities with video games and to do rehabilitation, and also for older people. Is it rewarding? Is it how do you find it? How did you end up doing this, and do you see yourself still doing it for a while?
Well, yeah, I had a good friend. So I worked as a consultant for 8 years, and if you do that, the longer you do that, the more you end up talking to the big bosses, and you talk less and less to the people who do the work, because that's the nature of things. And I didn't like that so much, so I got a little bit tired of that work. But I enjoyed it quite a lot. And then I had a good friend who also worked at the same company, and she wanted to start her own business. She wanted to do something in elderly care. So she quit her job very courageously, and started thinking about what to do as her own entrepreneur in her own business. And so sometimes she came to me and she said, what should I do? Because she had lots of ideas, everything concerning elderly care, but all over the place. She would try, maybe I will do this, maybe I will do this, maybe I will do that. And then on one day when I was not really thinking about the consequences, I said, maybe you should make games, because, this is something that has always been an interest. So I said, maybe you should make games. And she liked this, and she is a little bit, she is rather action-oriented. There's not very many people who are so action-oriented as my business partner. So the next morning she came very early in the morning for me, because I don't like to wake up in the morning. And she came to my house to write a business plan. And my idea was that this would be her business, and she would run this, and I would do fly around the world and do container ports. But that was not her idea, and because she really thought it would be cool to do that together. And I had the opportunity for the consulting firm where I was to do a trip to Silicon Valley and talk to a lot of people. I think we talked to the guys who made the iPod, and we talked to some early people who were busy making the electric cars. I think with Tesla, but I don't remember. We talked to the head game designer at Electronic Arts, and our story was we had to come up with an idea we were asking them, what should we do in the Netherlands to be as innovative as Silicon Valley? And of course, these guys had no ideas, had no idea how to do it, or everyone said something different. But they all said one thing, which is, if you have a great business idea and you have an idea that you like, you should start doing it yesterday. You should never question yourself and wait, and because someone else will take the opportunity. So if you have a good idea, then do it now. So I wrote my resignation letter in the plane back, because if 10 of these very amazing people tell you the same thing, I think it's good to listen to them. And that's how I started this business. And yes, it's super rewarding, because we've done it 15 years. My business partner has quit the company. She's still an owner, but I now run it by myself. We have close to 50 people working in this company, and we sell all over the world. But what we do, and so basically what we do is we make computer games that help you perform the right exercises if you are doing rehabilitation. So, for instance, standing up or sitting down or something like that. And we make this for people with dementia. So it's super, or sometimes dementia, or sometimes they have had a stroke, but it's always old people. Almost always old people. It's almost always people who have never played games before, or computer games before, and who often have something like dementia or cognitive impairment. So I sometimes joke that with Splotter we make the most complicated games that around, and with Silverfit I make the simplest games around. And by the way, making the simplest games is much harder than making the most complicated. Because simplifying to a real basic level is super challenging. And it's the kind of stuff where people, I mean, yes, we have very big fans at Splotter, but I think there are no people who would say that their lives were changed because of a Splotter game. We change lives with Silverfit games. We have people who write us postcards saying, thanks to you, my mother found the energy again to keep on working on a rehabilitation process, and she can move her arms again, and she can go to the toilet independently again, and this changed the last 3 years of her life. And that's a beautiful thing to be able to do that with games.
Yeah. So you were busy doing things. How did you and Jeroen meet?
Jeroen and I met.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jeroen
and I met. I remember vividly the first time that we met because I was in my student town. You become a member of a student society.
I see.
So this is you don't have to, but it's kind of the thing to do. And most student societies are very
loud.
They're loud and about drinking beer.
Yeah.
And so I did not become a member of one of those, although you could drink beer there. But I became a member of a student society which also had a tea drinking area. And Jeroen doesn't drink any alcohol, so he came also to this place. And I'm 1 year older than Jeroen, so I was already a 1 year old student, and he came there in his introduction week. And we met and we discussed, I think, some mathematics and other interesting biology stuff. And then we discussed, I think, the game of Pente, which is Gobang. And we played, I think we may have even played, or we at least talked about it. And I explained to Jeroen some of the Avalon Hill games that I liked, which he had never heard of. And apparently he thought this must be a wonderful student society where all these people who sit here drink tea and
play games.
Talk about these beautiful games. So he became a member. And
so this is how Jeroen never got into the beer drinking ones.
He never got into the beer drinking. No. He drinks absolutely no alcohol. And in that student society, Jeroen and I and my girlfriend at the time, Tamara, and some other members made what was called a pact. And that was like a society within the society, so a kind of interest group in the society. And this group was going to play board games, because I liked that and Jeroen liked that, and I convinced the others that they liked it as well. And that was nice, except that it was a very small group, and we didn't have enough people to play the games that we wanted to play. So I started inviting people from the outside, and that was okay for a while, but very soon the student society said that's not the purpose, because only members of the student society can come into our building.
Yeah.
So I said, that's fine, then I will take this society, this gaming society outside. And Jeroen and Tamara and 2 others founded, and I and two others founded a gaming society called Duivel's Ei, the Devil's Egg, which means a die, which is a student gaming society in the city of Leiden. I think it now has a couple of hundred members, maybe 500 or so. So this year, I think it exists for 25 years, because that's that's all time ago. But that's what I did. That's what we strong and the original society that we became members of no longer exists because it went bankrupt. But it also had never was as big as this gaming society now is.
I see.
So that's where Jeroen and I played and started making games together as well.
So I can, while you were growing, I can see you played a lot of games. You said you played 18xx, right? And yep. Some Avalon Hill titles. When did you start thinking? Did you start thinking about creating games before or after the explosion of modern board games appeared? When I say modern, I think that around 94, 95 with Catan, everything started to grow again in the board game industry, or was more interesting to the world again. Board games were more interested to the world. Did you start creating games before that, or let's say professionally? Let's call it professionally, or
no? I think the first plotter game we published in 1996, 1997, something like this.
Dealer?
No. The first games that we made, Roads and Boats is the first game that we made that is still published and big. The very first games that we made were called Tetragons, now Orgaklos, and Web and Draf, and those were very simple games. So a funny thing about Splotter is that we were founded with a mission, an official mission, to make a simple and affordable games that can be played by everyone. That's what we wanted to do.
You should have that now on your website.
So we made our first games, and because the very first games that we made, Jeroen is a co-author of some of them, but not even all of them, because we made them in the student society. And what happened is late in the evening, and we would have sometimes weekends, gaming weekends, and then late in the evening we would sit down and play some games, use some of the components that were around, and then play some funny games and make rules with them. And so the very first games that we made are all quite fast and simple. And we made them by hand, so literally cutting the pieces with a Stanley knife or with a cutting machine, a little hand cutter, and we sold them in video boxes, because we making especially in those days, when you did not have digital printing a box was very expensive. So we laser printed the components and glued them on cardboard and cut them, and then put them in video boxes. And so these are known as the video box games. You can still get them as print and plays on Board Game Geek. There's one of them is quite good, I think. Web, or two maybe. Web and Draf are quite good, and the others are a little bit less so, I would say now. But that's how we started.
And were you aware of the, let's say, revival of the board game industry and board games in general? Did you play the classical now, let's say Catan or games which appeared in the 90s. Some.
Yeah, so Catan, so Catan was already was quite late, I would say. So what happened is we played all the Avalon Hill stuff. So I was into the Avalon Hill, the older Avalon Hill stuff. In 1993, I think, we organized for the first time. I think it was 93, maybe it was 94, must be 94. Well, somewhere around that time, we organized for the first time a trip to the board game fair in Essen. At the time, I had been very often at the Dutch gaming convention events, and I thought that I knew board games. We managed to get the girlfriend of one of the guys in the society, and also the founder of co-founder of the society, was someone who had a driver's license, and we managed to get her crazy enough to drive to Germany with us. Which she found super scary. So she didn't. I remember that she didn't want to turn on the street. So whenever we made a mistake driving, then we had to make a very big circle because she did not know how to turn, and she had borrowed her mother's car, which was an enormous car. So it was hard for her. But I thought that I would not buy anything in Essen because I had seen games. Well, that was not the case. So Essen was full of games, amazing number of new games, and that it was only 10% as big as it is now, I think. So we bought these games, and we bought them in German. I played them in German. Dutch and German are not the same language, but I did German in school, and it was easy enough to read. And so I would explain it to the people in the society who could not read German. And to this day, I have all these games, and I buy all these games in German.
I think they were quite language independent. Usually, they were only the rules were in German, right?
Yeah, the rules are in German. Yeah, there was not so much of the card stuff.
Yeah.
So yes, we played a lot of these games. These were the games pre-Catan, I think.
El Grande or
El Grande, we play. I really liked it. Or Modern Art by Kinesia, I really liked. We played Adolf Verpflichtet. We played the Mosquito games, the early Mosquito games. That's by the guys at the time. Hans im Glück had still had games that they would sell a game for, I think, 100 Deutschmark, which was an amazing amount of money. And then if the game went well, they would make a big edition the next year, and you could hand in one component of your original game, and you would get something back for it, or money back, because they couldn't afford to make a big print run in one go, because they were still quite young and new, and they hadn't had Spiel des Jahres yet. Magic was very big, so we played a lot of Magic original editions. Magic. I was happy enough to have a very early Black Lotus card, and later on, Tamaha, my girlfriend at the time, became a teacher, and she would then, 15 years later, sometimes bring the Black Lotus card to her children in school and said, "When I bought Magic as a kid, this is what we would get." Yeah. So we played a lot.
We played a lot. Yeah.
We played really a lot, and often. And all kinds of stuff. So very quick stuff and very long stuff. I've always really liked the long, complicated games, and Jeroen as well. So that's something that we really shared.
Back then, there were the American games were longer. Yeah. The European games were not that long and not that heavy back then. Outside the 18xx's. And
Yes, yeah. I'm always a little bit curious. That's true. A lot of the German stuff at the time that you would get in Essen was quite fast. Are they not as heavy? I don't know. I think some of the the games had sometimes more interesting options for strategy.
exactly, yeah, yeah.
Than you have nowadays, maybe. So it depends on I mean, that's vastly generalizing, but it depends a little bit on your definition of heavy. For instance, well, that's a little bit later, but when we started making games, we played a lot of the Chris Bourm games, which are two-person abstract games, GIPF and a whole series of games around that.
I see.
Those are super heavy games in a way, but they're abstract, completely abstract two-player games, which has kind of disappeared from the world. The American games were, well, the GIF just didn't disappear, but this type of games the French used to be very, and the Belgians used to be very fond of it. But we did not play so many war games. So the American war games were never really our thing. We did play some of them, but not a lot. We played a lot of this older American style stuff, and that we really liked.
So, how did you start thinking, well, let's do a publishing company?
That was not really my doing. All the businesses that as I said, my games company for older people, which I started much later than Splotter, was founded because my business partner was interested in doing this, and that was the same with Splotter. It was not really my ambition to have a company. We had made a little Dutch society of game designers, because I like making societies.
I can see that.
And I was in the board of this society for game designers, but it had a very funny aspect. There were 25 members, but only one of them had published a game. And all the other 24 people were members of the game designer society, but they had lots of ideas, but no published games. So it was a bit funny. So we got together and talked about designing games, but no one had ever published anything. And the one guy who had published something was very proud of it and didn't want to share anything about how he did that. And it was all a secret because it was his big... it's not a very famous game that he made. It's a cute game, but I think you would struggle to find it now. Then my girlfriend Tamaha said that it should be really fun to make a company. She comes from a family of entrepreneurs. Her father is an amazing entrepreneur who seems to have done every type of business that there is in the world. She said, let's make a games company. So we said, okay. So we got two of the other entrepreneurs, or two of the other people who liked making games in this group together. And we hired a stand in Essen with the three of us. One of them is Kwali, Corné van Moorsel, who's still always in Essen, who has a whole series of games. The other was Theo Jansma, who had a company or had games at the time called Pseudon. He stopped after 2 years, but Corné and we went on. And we hired a stand called Dutch Game Designers with a big Dutch flag, and I think we had 15 new games to show. And now Theo had money, so he actually published his games and went to a factory and made 1,000 copies or whatever he made, 500 copies. For us, a lot. I think 1,000 copies of each game. Cornet did not have money, but he made abstract two-player games at the time, really good ones, really wonderful games. And he made them out of wooden cubes and out of clay and all this kind of stuff. But he already sold some games at the and we had ideas, but nothing else. So after we had arranged this wonderful booth, we had to actually produce the games.
Which was what year? In which year did you do that?
Yeah, I think 1995 or 96.
I see.
Yeah, and it was really tough. We made these games, and it was a lot of work to make the games. So and especially this one game called Web. It has tiles, and you have to place the tiles on the table. But the tiles have little corners in them, and so you cannot cut them with a cutting machine. You have to cut them with a Stanley knife. So all the tiles that have no corners, they were quickly done. And then the tiles that have corners, you had to cut them one by one with a Stanley knife. We didn't finish it, so we sat at the trade fair, and of course, no one wanted to buy the other games that we had, which we had made 40 or 50 copies, and of Web we only had 10. Everyone wanted to buy the Web. We had more materials, but we hadn't cut these items. So we would tell people, I'm cutting the game. If you come back in an hour, I will have your game ready. So we would be producing the game literally at the Essen, fair.
Yeah, the beginnings of a company. Well, let's go to a bit later. I think your first, let's call it, success was Roads and Boats, right?
Yeah.
And Bus afterwards. No?
Yes.
So they were more or less in the same time.
Roads and Boats is older, but we published that in the same at the same time. So Roads and Boats was the very first big game that Jeroen and I worked on, and we did it really for ourselves because, as I said, we wanted to make simple, accessible games. And Roads and Boats is not simple or accessible. It's also completely impossible to produce. And so we designed Roads and Boats. My girlfriend really liked Roads and Boats at the time. I played it a lot. I think of all the games that it's the one game that I played endlessly. After we were done playtesting, I would still play and play and play. And my girlfriend and I would have to do work on our study, and then we would play a game of Roads and Boats, which takes 3-4 hours. And then we would have finished, and she would say, shall we do it again? And then, okay. And so we would sometimes play 3 games of Roads and Boats in a day, and spending 12 hours just playing, and then deciding that, well, the study would be postponed for another day. We made a wooden copy of Roads and Boats, a very beautiful, completely wooden copy, very big, amazingly nice components. All the stuff out of clay, handmade, all the transporters and stuff made out of clay, handmade, and made out of wood and hand painted. And we brought this copy to Essen just to show off. So we had all these other stuff, but just as decoration in the stand, really, as we brought a copy of Roads and Boats. And so all the people who came by were kind of interested. Some people were politely interested, and some people were really interested in the small games that we had, and some of the some people like the journalist from the Spielerei, for instance, a little German magazine, came by and wrote about it, and that's definitely something that built our fame, or built our reputation in the beginning. But almost everyone who came by wanted to know more about this big wooden box of Roads and Boats. So we showed it to a couple of people, and people got super excited about it. So 1 year later, we had the crazy idea of making handmade copies of Roads and Boats and selling them. And I think we managed to we decided we would make 20 copies, but I think we never got further than 8 because it is so much work just to make this.
Yeah.
To cut. Yeah. And those components were not as nice as the beautiful box that we had. They were really really bad components. But what we could do in a limited amount of time. And we sold every single one of those boxes for what was a then ridiculous price. I don't remember, but we felt it was amazingly expensive. We sold it all on the Wednesday, and the fair starts on Thursday.
Yeah.
But on the Wednesday, you set up stuff, and so all the people who are in the know, they arrange that they somehow have tickets, exhibitor tickets, to be there on the Wednesday already. And so on Wednesday, so many people came by and asked to get a copy of this box that we had sold out our entire print run of 10 copies, or 8, or whatever it was, before the fair even started. And then we said, oh, maybe there is something to this Roads and Boats.
And then you started. And then, of course, Splotter became in the industry one of the, let's call it, exotic publishers. It has its own way of doing business. Why does Splotter does it this way? Why did you print a limited amount of copies? Why do you do this way your business?
Well, it started out of necessity. So we had this game Roads and Boats that we liked, and we sold this first 8 or 9 copies, and then we went around and we looked for a publisher. So we talked to every single publisher we could find to see if they would publish our game. And we got told that Roads and Boats is like a computer game. It's not fun. No one wants to play it. You should maybe consider doing something else than game design. We went to a very famous a guy that we knew very well, was very big in the game industry in the Netherlands. He played it and he said, well, yeah. And he looked for polite words to tell us to please spend our lives on something else. So this was the reaction. We said, okay, that's fine. Then we will make something that publishers like. So we made Bas, and we made Kan, and we made Ohaklos, which was at first made to see if publishers would take our game. They didn't. So we made our first games ourselves. We managed to earn some money by making a game for a Dutch municipality, and we made money with that. And all the money that we made was spent on publishing a small print run of the games. We tried to get those games into shops. So Johan and I took a car and drove past every game shop in the Netherlands and asked them to please sell our games. 90% of them said no. The ones that said yes, we'll sell your games. Just put it here, but we'll only pay you if we actually sell the game. We never saw any money from most of them. One of them, in the end, sent us a little bit of money. They sold the game for five guilders, so €2.50, because it was possible to sell, but they did send us that money. We had some trouble getting publishers to actually buy our game, publish our games. And print runs were not super big. So the first print run of Roads and Boats, I think when we had the money together, we went for the absolute minimum print run that we could possibly get someone to make for us. And making small print runs used to be super expensive. It's cheaper now, but it used to be super expensive because digital print didn't exist. So you had to have the print plates. And so all of these guys who you would get stuff from, they were not interested in this, in the business of printing 500 boxes or printing 500 pieces of cardboard or making wooden pieces for you. The first games that we made, we got the wooden pieces for free by going past we visited the guy who sold these wooden pieces, and he did a whole presentation for us on all the stuff that he wanted, and then that he had, and then he asked, how many do you want to make? And we said, well, we want to make 50 copies of this game. He started laughing. He took us to his garage, and he said, take any stuff that you want. You can just use it. You can just use it. You don't have to pay me, because for 50 copies, I should not have woken up this morning. But he gave us the pieces for free, so that was cool. So we had free pieces. We spent 3 hours in getting to his house, or 4 hours, but that was fine as a student. So in other words, we were not the big famous Splotter brand. We were guys making games that we really liked, but no one else, almost no one else seemed to like them. No one wanted to publish it.
Yeah.
So we did it ourselves. And so they had to be very expensive, because making these 500 copies of these initial 500 copies of Roads and Boats, they were super expensive. So we spent no money on anything that was unnecessary. So we did not make a backside of the box, for instance. It was white, because it was money. We're still famous for this.
And I think this is still going on, right? With nothing on the, but now, well, it became, let's say, a stamp of Splotter. But even today, you have the same model, in a way.
Yeah.
You still print lower print runs. Why do you do it that way today?
Well, our print runs are much bigger than they used to be, especially after Food Chain, because Food Chain did really well. So we print a lot of. Our print runs are bigger. They're no longer 500 copies.
Yes, but there are still, because Splotter games are not. They have a certain price, mainly because you have you do not print thousands of copies. You still go for a lower print run. You want to keep this idea of a smaller company which make games for a certain niche.
I'm fine with everyone who wants to buy our games. So what we do these days is we make if we make a new game, or if we do a reprint, we open pre-orders online.
Yeah.
And we ask all of the shops in the world who want to sell our games. Luckily, it's no longer 0 shops that want to sell our
and
games.
You don't have to go by car to them.
And we don't have to go to them by car, so we can just email out a list, and then people react. And then we come up with a certain number of games that people will actually buy. And then we produce that number plus a little bit. And it is often the case that the plus a little bit is because it takes a while before you actually have the games. The plus a little bit normally lasts us a couple of months or sometimes a year after the initial print, after the actual release, and then the game is out. This is very, from a business perspective, as a small company, this is very pleasant, because it is extremely expensive to hold on to stock, to have all these games in stock, and to send them out, to warehouse them all. Yeah. You have invested all this money in these games that are standing there, and we have been bitten by that quite harshly. So when we made, for instance, Bus, we made first, I think 100 copies of Bus by hand. And then we had some money and we made 750 copies because everyone said Bus is the greatest game ever. So we thought, God, that's great. We make 750, maybe 1,000. I think 750 copies in a factory, really professionally produced, at least to our standards, up to them. So not handmade. They didn't sell. No one wanted to buy them. Yeah, sure. The first and everyone was clamoring for it. So the first 250 copies or so, we sold them. And then we warehoused the rest. And in those days, we didn't have a warehouse. So they were warehoused in the house of my girlfriend's parents. And then my girlfriend's father decided that his house would become a bed and breakfast hotel. and he put all the games in the garage. Now, games in a garage is not a great place for board game.
Yeah.
So we had to throw away lots of these games because they had mold in it and they had trouble. And we moved these games from location to location, and it took us years and years to sell out this print run. There's a funny thing about games that if you make them, they are all super. Everyone really wants to have them. Then the next year you sell about a third to a half of that number, and the next year you sell about a third or a half of that number, and that means that very quickly, if you have a big stock, you're just moving stock around, and nothing happens.
But that did not happen with Food Chain Magnate, because Food Chain Magnate was your biggest success to date.
Yeah, so with Food Chain, something funny happened. It sold very well. That happens more often. Then it sold so well that we had shops asking us for reprints. That had not happened before, I think, or not quickly. So we actually made a pretty sizable reprint because we had so many orders that we made a reprint which was bigger than the first print. And then that all sold out faster than we could make the reprint, and we had even more orders from shops. And this went on, and it is still going on. I mean, it still happens today. And the game came out in 2015, and we have had reprints every single year since then. And it has been translated into Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Italian, Polish, Spanish.
There's not that much to translate in that game.
No, yeah, well, the rules. Yeah. So we have international editions of the game, and that has been a completely different experience for us.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about how much do you play test your games?
We tested a lot. We spent often a couple of years to come up with a new game, which is, that is also, of course, something different from what most people do, or I don't know, but for sure for us, Jeroen has a job and I have a job, so we make games because we like to make the game, and it also means that we have the luxury of taking as long as we like to make to come up with something new.
Yeah.
And we do. We only play in the weekends normally. Sometimes when a game is almost finished, we can take a couple of days off and just spend a couple of days in a row play testing. But normally the pace is that we play every weekend or every second weekend. And we get together and play for a full day. And that can that can go quite fast for some games. So, for instance, Indonesia was very quick, and for other games that can easily take 3 years of playing.
I see. You, of course, you need to play at all player counts, and so roughly a number of how many play tests do you have in the hundreds? Lower than 100 playtests? When do they differ from game to game?
Yeah, they differ a lot from because it's hard to say it in a number. They differ a lot because they differ for the type of playtest. So in the beginning, these type of sessions are more around messing around with ideas, and sometimes it's just talking, and then Jeroen's girlfriend says that she won't come because it will just be a blah blah session and we won't do anything. But very quickly we come up with very simple mechanics that you can play. Some people say those are the only versions of our games that are actually playable because they're still simple and nice. and then we ruin it afterwards. These first sessions are very restricted. We have always the same group of people around the table. Other people are not really welcome because we want to think about this new stuff, and it's
you want to create something, and you want to
we want to create something,
and you need the same core there. You need the same people there, so the ideas stay it's how is it called? It's reliable. You have the same reliable people there, not with 100 ideas. Everybody's got you bring somebody new, he has a new idea. You bring somebody new, he has a new idea.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very it's somehow very closed. Yeah, and then after that we come up with a more workable game. And that more workable game we then play with a broader group of people, but still often quite the same group for maybe a year or 3/4 of a year. So then it would get maybe 1 or 2 full. If you do a full Splotter in the beginning, you can do more games because you can play something for half an hour and then you say it's not okay, and you change something, and then you play it for half an hour and it's not okay, and then after a while you're more.
It gets longer and longer.
It gets longer because you play to the end, and at some point there is in the beginning often there's no win condition, so we don't know what makes you win the game. We just play to be interested in what happens. Then you get a win condition, and you have a real game, and then we open up the playtesting. So that is the time when I start asking people if they want to join. When sometimes we play, sometimes Jeroen goes and he plays it at Jeroen goes to a lot of these conventions, and he plays it at conventions with at the Gathering of Friends, which is a big gathering of people who game designers made by Alan Moon.
Yeah. That's in the US, the Gathering of Friends, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Jon flies to the US to play this game there with people. We sometimes play it in Essen. If we have something that's ready, we play it in Essen with people. We sometimes organize Splotter conventions where we just invite anyone. We have had people. One crazy guy fly from the US to play test with us for a weekend. This is much more open, and because that's there we want to have lots of ideas and opinions and stuff, and that is then you parallel play test. So then we don't play test. We don't give the game to. We don't. Well, sometimes we do, but more for testing rules. We give the game to someone externally, but normally we do want to be there, because what I find very difficult in playtesting is I cannot see the results by asking questions. I can only understand how the game is going by actually seeing the game.
Yeah, seeing the reactions.
Seeing reactions, yeah. And so all kinds of formal methods where you do a survey or something, I don't understand. I cannot work with it.
What is your design philosophy? Do you have one?
Yeah, Jeroen likes this word as well. I don't know if we have that strong a design philosophy. We like to make something that we enjoy. I personally, and I think that's more me than Jeroen, I don't like to do something again. So I want to have something that's new. And different. Obviously, you will end up with a certain style of stuff. So there will be things that are similar across the games, and then other people write that there's this pattern across games, and then I decide I will not do it again and try to do something different. I do think that although both you and I enjoy games that are different from that basic principle, I do think that we really like the games to be super competitive. We do not enjoy lots of exceptions or funny exceptional rules for different things. So we normally don't have that so much. We are quite open to stuff where you have to think quite far ahead, or you have to consider quite lots of different things. So, and also we have apparently small fingers, because I'm told that everyone else finds our games very fiddly, but that's so they're very open to that.
A lot of chits, lots of chits.
Lots of chits, yeah. We never mind having more chits in. And I like the game. I like that every decision matters. I don't like it if there's a lot of stuff that is kind of there for form. Although sometimes, like with, in fact, something like Food Chain, my original game of Food Chain did not start with 0 employees. It started with you already having a bank of employees, because the first couple of turns tend to be scripted.
Yeah, it is scripted, yeah.
And the same is with Roads and Boats. The first couple of turns are quite scripted, and so, but those are things that people that come out of playing the game with people who are playing it for the first time, and then they say, well, we understand the game much better if we can go through these first rounds just getting to know how it works and having the feeling that we really built something from the beginning. So, okay, that's a kind of, we adjusted Food Chain based on that feedback, and I think it's very good feedback, because it's easier for people to get into it.
Yeah, but they can also make the mistake at the beginning.
They can still make the mistake at the beginning, yes.
As I've heard it, I did not hear you, but I've heard this saying. I don't know if you or Jeroen said it. If you cannot lose a game on your first turn, why there is a first turn?
Yeah, so that is in the context of having. So when we made Food Chain, I was actually very worried, because our playtesters thought Food Chain was too aggressive, and our playtesters know our game a lot. I had a playtester call me after a playtest weekend of Food Chain to tell me that this was a game we should not publish. It was really too much. It was not as good as our other games, because it was too aggressive. So when we made Food Chain, I did try to explain to everyone that this was a very aggressive game and you shouldn't buy it. But
it did not
because
work out,
I really hate this situation, which happens a lot to us, where people buy our stuff because they think, oh, it's Splotter. We heard a lot of good stuff about Splotter. Oh, it must be an amazing game. And then they buy it, and it's absolutely not what they want. So you have people who open the box and they start reading the rules, and then they get a tremendous headache. They put everything back in, and then they just spend a lot of money on something they don't want. And I really dislike that. So I tried to warn people. Apparently, it was good marketing, because people bought the game. And my point in that remark was that turns should matter. So I don't really like it if a game has. So of course there is value in a game having, in everyone being able to win the game until the last moment. There's some kind of excitement in it. You make a TV quiz game, where if you watch TV quizzes, then often the setup is such that the first round doesn't matter and the second round doesn't matter, because in the last round you will always get more points than in the first two rounds.
Double the points, yeah.
Double the points. The reason for this is very simple, that you can still win until the end. So it keeps exciting. It keeps being exciting. But to me, that also means that the first round is just useless, and the second round is also useless. You can just, in theory, you can just sit and do nothing, and then only wake up in the last round and do something very smart, and then that's the game. So I don't like that. I think there should be a story that goes across the full game, and that means that the first round of a game should also matter, if at all possible. And that, taken to its extreme, that means that you should be able to lose the game in the first round, because you should have the freedom to make choices. And the freedom to make choices means that you have the freedom to make mistakes. Otherwise, there's no real freedom. There is a designer who has thought what you can do, and you are just following their pattern instead of your own.
Yeah.
I understand it's not for everyone, so some people hate it, because we don't make games that are like, let's get together with our friends and have a beer and sit back, and we are actually about the game is like something that also happens on that evening. No, we make games that if you are playing a plotter game, you are you're not supposed to have so much brain power left that you can still do all kinds of other stuff.
No, you won't. You'll feel your brain burning at the end of a splatter game.
Yeah.
These were more or less my questions. I want to ask you one more question. What is fun? In a way, I kind of see it. What is fun to you?
What is fun to me?
Yeah.
In these games, or in games? Yeah, I like I like the exploration of what happens if you make a particular choices and how other people react to them. So I like it most if there are unexpected things that kind of happen because of the game or in the game's world, but that were not prearranged, let's say that way, predetermined. So some kind of
a player does something. A player does something that surprises you, and then you have to react to that, and you have to go forward.
Yes, yeah. So I really like that, and we use a trick to get there in most of our games, which is to combine a really strategic long-term decisions with quite hard to parse tactical things.
Yeah.
It's a trick that I learned from speaking to Francis Tresham, that I had the honor to meet, the maker of 1830, and he explained to me how he made games. And this is one trick I stole from him. To combine two different components in a game, which we very often do, whereby you can make a game that has long-term decisions, but if the impact of your decisions are too simple, then if you're smart enough, you can just always compute what the outcome of your decisions will be, and that makes the strategic decision quite shallow in a way.
Yeah,
and you can make very tactical game.
Yeah. You can make you can see it from that moment, and you can see everything, and that becomes boring in a way.
That becomes boring.
Yeah.
And then you can make tactical games, which if there's very good tactical games, I can enjoy it because I like puzzles and I like that kind of stuff. Johan and I like computer puzzle games a lot, so we play lots and lots of those and share them with each other. But puzzle games are always a little bit in the moment and not really don't have this long-term stuff and not have the interaction. And so our trick is very often to combine something strategic with a puzzle, so that you cannot see the strategy, the outcome of the strategy, because the puzzle is too complicated and you cannot see what will be the outcome of the puzzle.
Yeah. Could you answer me? What is your most played game?
That I play myself.
Yeah, that you played.
I think of all the games in the world, in my history, it's probably Talisman because I played it for so many hours. But I have to say, I did buy a Batman version of Talisman, and I did play that. But I think I played one game of Talisman in the past 15 years, so it's no longer my most played game. Jeroen plays a lot, so Jeroen plays everything. He has like a game group every evening. I have too many different interests, and I don't play that much games, so I play other games a lot with Jeroen. I think if the most played game outside of, and with Jeroen, the problem is he has so many. I used to have more games than Jeroen, but I stopped collecting, so I only buy very special stuff. Jeroen buys, well, everything is not true, but Jeroen has I have a room full of games that people think is impressive, but Jeroen has a floor in his house that is full of games. And that was before all the other floors also started to fill up with games. So he is like crazy. And he plays everything.
I need to talk. Then I need an interview with him.
Yeah. So Jeroen follows everything, and he buys, and he buys all the very special Japanese stuff, and does Google Translate to play that stuff, etc. I don't do that. I think probably the most played board game or card game I played in the past 10 years or so is probably Dominion, which I played really a lot as well. But that's because it's easy, simple to play.
Yeah, it's easy to play, and it has lots of expansions and lots of content.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite designer? Do you have one?
My favorite designer, I think it's Francis Tresham for 18xx. Yeah.
The inventor of 18xx.
Yeah, I really. Funnily enough, he never made good games because this original 18xx is not great and original Civilization is not great. But he made stuff that other people then made into really amazing games. So yeah, I used to like Knizia a lot, but if you play Knizia games, then you always get the same game over and over in different versions, and that kind of annoyed me. And I like Uwe Rosenberg games, but I like especially the stuff that he does that is not his big games. I think
like Patchwork. You like games like Patchwork?
Yeah, I think that's a cool one. And Bonanza, I think, is a brilliant game. I really like it, because I always value stuff that is funny or different, and I'm not really interested in the improved version of the previous game. So if I've played, to me, a lot of these kind of heavy worker placement games, the next one is better, but somewhat similar, and that I don't like so much. But something like Bonanza, I think it's brilliant because there's nothing like it.
I don't think there's something better than Agricola, so I do not agree with you.
Yeah. But Agricola was not the first. After Agricola, you have a lot of others.
Yeah, you do have, but that doesn't mean they're better.
Okay. You think they're better? Yeah.
This is the end of the first part. We went a bit longer than I usually go, but yeah, you did have a lot of things to talk about, and I did not want to interrupt you. So before we end this part, I want to ask you if you would want to add something. If there is something that I haven't asked you and you would want to add it.
I think I've already added lots of stuff. I agree with you. I'm always famous for not shutting up, so I'm sorry about that.
Nope, not a problem. It was a wonderful conversation. And we're going to finish with the big questionnaire. And I'm going to start with my first question, which is, this questionnaire is derived from Proust, if you are familiar with the Proust questionnaire, which is, there are the two questionnaires, one which you should do at a certain age, the other one later in your life.
Okay.
And This is derived from that, and it starts with this. What is your favorite word? And you can also say it in Dutch.
My favorite word.
Yeah.
This is a very strange question. Well, there's a beautiful Dutch word which if you talk really about words, it is the word gezellig, which means the pleasure of being in someone's company.
I see.
And
Gezellig.
I like that. Gezellig, yeah.
Gezellig. Interesting. What is your least favorite word?
Yeah, I don't know if it's really a word, but what I dislike most is being bored.
Bored.
Yeah.
What turns you on creatively, emotionally, or spiritually?
I think new things, anything new.
Anything new. Your cult of the new. Okay.
Yeah.
What turns you off? The same.
Yeah. If it's something that is if something becomes repetitive or the same, I don't like it.
I see. What is your favorite curse word? You can also say it in Dutch.
I rarely curse, funnily enough. I come from a family that my grandfather was a minister, and cursing is not really something we do.
It doesn't need to be a bad word.
We
all have.
I think my favorite one is a very strange a comment that my father used to make if he was pretending to be cursing, but it's not really something that you can curse with. It is Dutch. It is wat hamer, and it literally translates as what hammer.
What?
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It is in fact a very old statement that has all kinds of connotations with witchery, but that comes across as being very strange. And my father, who was not allowed to curse, would sometimes use that in strange
I see.
settings. And you can use it, and then everyone kind of looks at you, and you immediately talk about something else than being angry because no one understands what on earth you're doing.
What sound or noise do you love?
Music, I guess.
Something specific in music?
If I am very stressed and I want to relax, I play Brahms cello sonatas. No, I don't play. I cannot play, but I listen to it. Yes.
Yeah, to the cello.
Yeah.
The cello.
The cello, yeah, in English, cello.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I really cannot stand very sudden, loud noises of fireworks or something like this. I have grown up with quite in Yemen with quite some possibilities of gunfire.
I see.
So I don't like anything that makes me makes me think of guns.
Guns, yeah.
I also really don't like the sound of helicopters, because in Indonesia the army would fly over with helicopters if the stuff went a little bit iffy. And so I consider all helicopters to be aggressive things that are trying to invade my territory.
Which profession outside the one you already do would you like to attempt?
I think I would really like to be a super good cook in a Michelin star restaurant.
Which profession you would not like to attempt?
I think the most horrible thing I could do would be to be something like an accountant, that
You wouldn't like to do that.
Or a tax advisor, even worse. Anything with lots of administration, I really hate it.
And my last question, sir, is this one. If, this is a big if heaven exists, what would you expect God to say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
If heaven exists, then I would expect I do not get to the pearly gates because I am not religious. So I would have to apologize to God for being wrong. But I would really appreciate if God could explain to me why he allowed so much suffering in the world, if he is all powerful and all good, because I could never figure that out. I come from as I said, my grandfather was a minister. I have a very deep interest in theology, so I always tell Jeroen we should make a game about early Christian theology because it's one of my great hobbies.
I agree with that. It's an underutilized theme in the board game, and if it's a good game with that, that's rare. Sir, I want to thank you for coming on tonight and for making this interview. I hope you had fun. I hope you felt good all the way through. And I will close this. I will kindly ask you to not close the conversation so we can speak very little afterwards. Again, a big thank you. I was able to get you, and I want to again thank you for doing this.
Most welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Radu, for being here. Hello to you. I want to thank everyone who came and watched live. I will thank everyone who will come and watch after the fact. If you like what you see, please like, share, and subscribe. Keeps the internet alive and us going. If you have, I don't know, a few bucks to spare, you can support the channel on Patreon. And if you enjoy these kinds of interviews, please write some comments, or if you have any ideas, also write comments. Until next time, all I can say is, of course, I'll thank Joris for coming and doing this interview, and we'll see each other. We'll see in the next one. Until next time, all I have to say is what it says over here, which it says play a lot, play loads, as you Brits say, have fun, and bye bye, fine folks, wherever in the world you are.